Hi, my name's John Davis and I work with the South Pole Group. The South Pole Group are a Swiss company which has been developing emission reduction projects for 11 years around the world. We've now developed and own around 450 carbon emission reduction projects in a combination of both compliance and voluntary carbon schemes. I would want to talk today about the monitoring, reporting and verification of offset mechanisms. The methodology for most of these offset mechanisms is based around the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, which was developed as part of the Kyoto Protocol and the European Emissions Trading Scheme. The methodologies outline specific ways to monitor in collaboration with every single project type, and the voluntary schemes such as VCS and Gold Standard and other compliance schemes around the world mirror this original CDM methodology. Monitoring and reporting are conducted by the project owner or developer themselves, whereas the verification of the projects are typically done by an independent third party. Monitoring of a project is important because obviously this is where the understanding and accounting for the number of carbon offsets that are reduced as part of a project. By having a methodology which correctly ascertains and understands how the monitoring will be conducted, you can ensure that the offsets will be produced. There are in fact many projects around the world that are operating and reducing carbon which are not able to successfully claim the carbon offsets associated with that because of poor monitoring plans. So it's important that as a purchaser of carbon offsets, before that project is creating the actual offsets, you understand and do your due diligence around the monitoring schemes. As a project developer ourselves, in particular with large projects, we look to use an IT-based monitoring system which is integrated as part of the project. It's also very important that the relevant stakeholders and staff are trained and understand what is required of them with regards to monitoring projects. An example of projects which are easy to monitor would be renewable energy projects. These which supply electricity to the grid obviously have monitoring plans in place so they can account for the kilowatts or megawatt hours of electricity that they produce. This is easily convertible into an understanding of carbon offsets. Projects which are typically much harder to monitor are those where monitoring doesn't become an integrated part of their offset project. One would be methane reduction through flaring, where methane is typically released through a gas flue, and when the project is beginning, you'll flare that flue to reduce the methane into carbon dioxide. There's no commercial need in these plants to have any sort of monitoring equipment on the exhaust flue. Hence, generally staff are not trained to understand or monitor what is happening. There are many methane reduction plants around the world operating to this day where carbon offsets are not accounted at all because the correct systems are not in place and the correct staff are not trained. It's not only important as a project developer and project owner to understand the monitoring of a carbon offset project correctly, but also as a compliance purchaser. So as an entity that's required to submit carbon offsets in a compliance program, you may look to hedge your exposure in the future, and you may do that by purchasing offsets through compliance projects. You should do your due diligence on that project should include looking at the monitoring plan and ensure that the proper systems are in place, but also that staff and stakeholders are incentivized to ensure that continues over the life of that project. We go into more details in our chapter on monitoring, reporting and verification, but that wraps up what we have to say in this video. Thanks very much for listening.